Hello, everyone, and welcome back to 305 Insights. We're going to be discussing the Big Ten and previewing the season for basically the 1A or 1B in the P4, the Power Four conferences. You have new additions with Oregon, Washington, USC. Am I missing something? There's one more, right? Oregon, Washington, USC, and UCLA. Oh, almost missed that one there. Anyways, you know the drill here. Like we discussed in the Big 12, we're going to go top tier program, sleeper teams, teams in trouble, most in fact impactful players, and the top games. So the top tier programs, I think we all know the top two here. Ohio State and Oregon. The returning talent plus the high quality transfers that the Buckeyes got means Ryan Day and Ohio State are primed for a deep run into the college football playoffs, or it's a bust for this season. I mean, you got Will Howard transferring in from Kansas State. You had Junkins transfer in, the running back from Ole Miss. You had Caleb Downs, the safety from Alabama, who was one of the most impactful true freshmen in the country. And then you have all the talent coming back. The same talent that only lost one game in the regular season last year. And that one game is always crucial because that's the Michigan game. However, that's for another discussion. This team is literally built to win this year. There's no question that this is the ultimate test. It is the ultimate measuring of the type of coach that Ryan Day is. I have defended him in the past. I have said that he is and if you look at his record, he is a great coach. But the problem is you've lost 3 straight years to Michigan. That cannot happen. They need to beat Michigan. They need to make the college football playoffs, ideally win the Big Ten as well, and at least make the championship game. I mean, there's not, I mean, Georgia maybe, there's not that many more talented teams in the country than Ohio State. This is boom or bust for them. And that's why they're one of the top tier programs, because of these ridiculously elevated expectations. Oregon, they have one of the deepest rosters in the nation. And Dan Lanning Company only have one step left, and that's to win the big games. That's the knock on Dan Lanning so far at Oregon. I mean, even when they lost to Washington last year in the Big Ten championship game, Oregon was the favorite, even though they lost, because of all those miscues on fourth down in the regular season game. But they got beat in the Big Ten championship game as well. So you've seen the recruiting that Dan Lanning's done. You've seen how they've built up the trenches, kind of like how Georgia's done it. Not that they did have that issue before, because they had Mario Cristobal, and he's always done that. They bring in Dylan Gabriel as their QB to replace Bo Nix. They have enough talent to withstand that transition to the Big Ten, because they kind of fit the mold. They do have an explosive offense. However, they do play a brand of smash mouth football that the Big Ten has a tendency to love. So those are my top 2 teams. Both of those teams I do expect to make the college football playoffs. Those are the bare minimum expectations for them. Sleeper teams. Here I'm not including Penn State or Michigan because of their expectations. I mean, Michigan, yeah, they lost a lot of talent, but they are coming off a national championship, and they do have plenty of talent returning. It's just a matter of how do they maneuver the post Harbaugh era. Penn State has always been that 9-3, 10-2 team that loses to Michigan and Ohio State, and everybody says, well, they are one of the better teams in the country. Well, now there's 12 spots. Can they make it? But I'm looking at two other teams. I'm looking at Lincoln Riley and USC. Can he lead an offense with Miller Moss and a new defense and DeAnton Lynn? Again, Alex Grinich was, I don't know if he had some sort of dirt on Lincoln Riley to be employed with him for so long, because his defensive schemes and defenses overall were just abysmal, putrid, horrible, however you want to label them. Changes have been made, and they could pay off sooner rather than later for USC. There's a lot of talent on that team. There's been rumblings and rumors from insiders as well as national media members that have said that Lincoln Riley kind of went a different route last year with Caleb Williams once the offensive line was, they suffered some injuries and then they just weren't as good as expected. Lincoln Riley is, again, all alleged, altered the playbook to make sure that Caleb Williams would be able to stay healthy rather than executing what probably would have been better offensive game plans, because he knew Caleb would be the number one overall pick. Now, whether that's truth to that or not, we'll see. Again, Miller Moss has been in the system for a while. You saw his performance in the bowl game. Scared off some people, as Lincoln Riley like to say. That's why Malachi Nelson, one of the number one recruits in the country a few years ago, QB, transferred to Boise State. That's why some people allege that Will Howard and or others did not transfer into USC. With the new offensive mindset and a brand new defensive coordinator, ideally that should lead to improvements for USC. There's plenty of talent there. They just got to get the ball rolling. And once USC gets the ball rolling, not saying they're going to be like the early 2000s USC under Pete Carroll, but it's always good to see USC, one of the blue bloods in the NCAA, especially in college football, performing at a high level. My other one is going to be Wisconsin and Luke Fickell. Luke Fickell, coming over from Cincinnati, installed an air raid offense under, I'm blanking on the name, but he was the UNC, Phil Longo, the offensive coordinator previously at UNC. And again, Wisconsin in the Big Ten, smash mouth football. I know I keep on saying that phrase, but remember, this is the team that's had Ron Dane, Melvin Gordon, Jonathan Taylor. I'm sure I'm missing plenty of running backs, but that's just been their bread and butter. I remember years ago when Graham Mertz first showed up, he was, basically the signal for the new age of Wisconsin that, hey, we can pass the ball. Like that's how archaic their offense had become, as to where they were just depending on Melvin Gordon to run the ball for 400 yards. So again, turning over a roster that wasn't necessarily equipped to run an air raid offense. And they don't have Michigan or Ohio State on the schedule. Fickell's a really good coach. I mean, you saw that at Cincinnati. He was the same coach who led them to an undefeated season, the first Group of 5 program to make the college football playoff without any guarantees, compared to now what the highest ranked Group of 5 member will make the playoffs. There's a lot to like with Wisconsin. So, again, when we say sleeper, I'm not expecting them to run the table or anything like that, but there's going to be a market improvement that people may not expect. And you got Tyler Van Dyke, and kind of threw shade at UM and Mario Cristobal with the sense of saying that they pretty much ruined this kid's confidence and that he's a hell of a quarterback. So can they bring out that TVD? the one who made that magical run a few years ago when he took over for De'Ara King at and he was one of the most efficient, explosive quarterbacks in the ACC. Can they extract that from TVD again? And if they can, you've obviously got some tough games like the Alabama game, but make a statement. This is year 2. See how it goes. Teams in trouble. So the Big Ten, as disappointing as this comes off, because I said previously that we would try and list 2 teams for each one. The Big Ten is currently, it's pretty stable conference when it comes to coaching. You got some guys like not Bieniemy. You got some guys like Michigan State doesn't have an issue. Michigan doesn't have an issue. Penn State doesn't have an issue. Ohio State doesn't have an issue. Wisconsin, Iowa, Nebraska is still year 2 under Matt Rule? Like, it's just not. There's not a lot of. Is it Brent Bielema at Illinois? Maybe him, but there's not really a lot of hot seats in the Big Ten right now. Although, again, I've said it in previous podcasts with the teams with the most pressure to win. Ohio State is the one team to watch for. Again, I know I consider them in the top tier programs, and they're one of the top programs in the country. If they fall to Michigan once again, and maybe they lose to Oregon and they don't win the Big Ten, and somehow they back into the college football playoff and get eliminated in the first game, he's going to be in trouble. As absurd as all that sounds, if he has a 10-win season, that might not be enough with all the talent and the expectation that they have. You cannot lose to Michigan this year. Absolutely cannot. That is probably the deal breaker. And it would be interesting to see this scenario where they go undefeated outside of the Michigan game and make a deep run to the college football playoffs and lose. Is that enough? Again, can you take 4 years losing to Michigan as opposed to, hey, we made the college football playoffs and we won a game or 2? Interesting. But again, that's probably the team that has the most pressure. They're not in trouble. It's a difference. But again, just to throw someone in there. The most impactful players, I mean, again, you've got your guys like Caleb Downs, Will Johnson, the cornerback at Michigan. And it's just, I kind of want to take a different approach, at least with the first 2 guys. Nebraska QB, true freshman, Dylan Raiola. The new savior of a once proud program. I mean, Nebraska was one of the most consistent programs throughout decades of college football, from the 70s, 80s, 90s, Tom Osborne years at the end where they just kept on winning in a dominant fashion. And then ever since he left, you had, was it Frank? He won the Big 12 in 2001 with Eric Crouch, or 2000 with Eric Crouch, and they went to the 2001 national championship game. But other than that, it's been downhill from there. And you thought you had the prodigal son returning in Scott Frost, and nothing came of that with him being the coach. You have the expectations of Matt Rule and how he builds a culture and how he built it up at Temple. And you can just see, I believe he did the same thing. It was Baylor, right? He was the one who took over after the Art Briles incident. This is his crowning achievement to get this young man to flip. And this isn't a matter of the impact that he's going to have this season. I mean, if he has a good season, then Nebraska is going to, probably be a little better than last year because of all the issues they had at quarterback last year. However, The more important thing is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Is this the turning point for Nebraska to be a winning team again? It all lands, it all falls on this kid's shoulders. That's all the Cornhusker faithful are asking for at this point, is to have a winning season and to have hope. The constant sellouts, year after year, game after game, with no expectations. Now they want to have expectations. Can Dillon lead them? Let's hope so. Again, I really enjoy when certain blue bloods are relevant again. College football's better. I mean, you saw Michigan with Harbaugh and how they peaked last year. It just makes it for a better overall game when USC, when Texas, Michigan, Ohio State, well, Ohio State's always been a good one, Nebraska, FSU, Florida, all these teams that, sometimes are in the dumpsters. When they come back, it's just really good for the health of the game to have good teams spread out throughout the country. You always have to have a good team coming out of Texas. You always have to have a good team coming out of California. Florida has to have a good team, whether it's one of the big three. Ohio State, Michigan. Anyways, my next most impactful player is Ohio State wide receiver, true freshman Jeremiah Smith. Can he be the new Marvin Harrison Jr.? This kid was hyped up to no end. He's impressed in the camps leading up to the season. What are realistic expectations for him? Can he help this offense be even more dynamic just as a true freshman alone? There's other players, obviously, on the team like we talked about. Caleb Downs, Junkins, Will Howard, all those people. But the impact that Jeremiah Smith can have can go a long way into making sure that this program meets expectations next year. USC wide receiver Zachariah Branch, 7.8 yards per rush, 31 receptions, 30.8 yards on punt returns, and he had touchdowns at punt and kickoffs returns. Offense is going to flow through him. The more he touches the ball, the better it will be. The final person I have is Penn State defensive end Abdul Carter, another first-round edge rusher for James Franklin and company, possibly a top 15 pick if he has the season that he's expected. If he plays up to his ability, Penn State is going to have another anchor on that defensive line that they can lean on. No Manny Diaz this year, less aggressive blitzing possibly, but they will need him to step up. Top games this year: Ohio State at Oregon on October 12th, Texas at Michigan September 7th, Ohio State at Penn State November 2nd, USC at Michigan September 21st, and of course the game Michigan at Ohio State November 30th. Ohio State and Oregon is going to be important, obviously, because those are the top two teams. Texas at Michigan, that's the battle of the SEC versus Big Ten, who wins out on that, and it kind of shows where Michigan is as a program currently. Ohio State, Penn State's always big. USC at Michigan, that's USC's introduction to the big house and see how they perform. And the game's always the game. So a lot of new entries into the Big Ten. We'll see how they perform. Obviously, Oregon's got high expectations. Where will UCLA go? Where does Washington go without Kalen DeBoer? And where do some of these teams that benefited for the East-West sort of combination of having, Ohio State, Penn State, Michigan State in one side of the conference, and then it's basically who wins out of Iowa, Wisconsin, et cetera, and they always lose in the Big Ten championship game. So it's a new day in the Big Ten, and there are a lot of expectations for this program to go head-to-head, for this conference to go head-to-head with the SEC. in terms of how many teams that they could fit into the college football playoff 12-team bracket. So, which conference do I think is deeper? I'll save that for later. So, we've got 2 conferences down, 2 left to go. Trying to pump out this content, folks, before the season starts. It's my bad for delaying the inevitable, but nonetheless, we're getting it out to you. You know the drill. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, do all the positive stuff. If you have feedback, give it to us. Just want to thank you for listening. Thanks for stopping by, and we'll catch you next time here on 305 Insights.